Greetings and welcome, friends. I'm Ash, and today I would like to talk to you about Factorio Space Age, which I can only assume exists in some sort of a magical time bubble. Every single time I sat down to play the new expansion, I would spend an hour tinkering with my spaceship or exploring a new planet, only to then get up for a drink and realize an entire day has passed, it's now 5 AM, and I need to get up for work in an hour. So if you're curious what exactly makes Space Age so addicting, as well as what sort of challenges you'll have to brave in order to start an interstellar empire, allow me to share with you my thoughts after spending way too much time playing Factorio this past week. While the majority of Space Age's focus is on exploring new worlds, there are also a couple of notable changes to life on Navis. Fluids are now a lot easier to handle and require less fiddly pipework. Train networks are significantly smoother to set up thanks to raised railways. And some technologies have been shuffled around to make progression a bit more straightforward, as well as to force players to learn tricks they'll need in space before giving them full access to the power of automated bots. Most importantly of all, launching rockets is now a lot lower on the tech tree and a lot cheaper in terms of resources. This means that, if you are so inclined, you can start going to space very early in your playthrough. However, in order to compensate for the reduced price, you'll need to send a lot of rockets into space in order to construct and outfit your space platforms, since each rocket can only carry a very small amount of cargo. This, funnily enough, is where my biggest gripe with Space Age lies, and we haven't even gotten to space yet. Every time I went to expand my space platform, or try to build another one to serve as a sort of an automated cargo freighter, I would be forced to sit around just watching rocket after rocket after rocket after rocket after rocket launch one after another into space, carrying a very minuscule amount of resources. Now, Factorio is full of small annoyances like this, but they're usually intentional and they serve as a teaching tool before you unlock something bigger and more efficient, with the contrast between the two making you appreciate the improved version even more. There's a real sense of progression there. Yet, for whatever reason, there is no way to expand the rocket capacity, and I cannot help but feel like that was a mistake since it only really makes things more tedious, not challenging. The reason this tickled me the wrong way was because I really found myself loving the space platforms. They are essentially automated factories that you have to create remotely with the ingredients you send up into orbit, after which you can basically leave them to fend for themselves. Once properly kitted out, they'll be able to gather resources by breaking down and capturing asteroids, create ammo, fuel, and other components right there in space, and even transport precious cargo between planets all on their own. And since you're the one that decides their shape and function, each one of mine ended up being a gorgeously ugly brick that barely functioned, yet somehow, just beyond all odds, kept chugging along without even a single hitch. So needless to say, I love every single member of my masonry fleet. Using these space platforms, you'll be able to visit 3 unique planets in whichever order you want, after which you'll unlock a 4th and significantly more challenging world, a desolate, frozen hellscape known as Aquilo. Before we get to that, let's explore the worlds in the order I did, starting with what would eventually become my main Forge world, which is Volcanus. True to its name, Volcanus is a world that consists of rivers of lava, endless stretches of charred wasteland, and the occasional giant worm that loves to specifically snack on whatever equipment you value the most at any given time. How exactly they're able to judge that, I have no idea, but I've come to both hate and respect them by the time I was done. With all of that in mind, why in the world would you even visit this, world? Well, that would be because Volcanus has a frankly absurd amount of resources to offer. Once you wrap your head around the new mechanics and start utilizing foundries and big mining drills, you'll be able to pump out such quantities of steel and other ingredients that you won't even know what to do with them. And after struggling for hours with getting my starter base on Navis up to scratch in order to finally launch into space, this was an absolute delight. The overabundance of resources is also what helped me construct my fleet of flying bricks. So despite being the most, shall we say, vanilla of the four worlds, I had a great time trying to squeeze every bit of productivity I could out of Volcanus. This is where I also started experimenting with another big feature Space Age brought with it, and that is quality. By inserting quality modules into buildings, you have a chance to create items that range from uncommon to legendary in quality. It is often not a very big chance, but considering how many items your factories can churn out every minute, even a humble 1% chance will very quickly make you flush with quality ingredients. As you would expect, higher quality products are notably better than their basic versions. They can either operate faster, have more health, more reach, more slots, more damage, and so forth. Because of this, quality is definitely something you'll want to dip your toes into as quickly as you can, if for no other reason than to create greatly improved versions of one-off items like the equipment you carry everywhere. I also have to commend its design, because it is a very simple to understand system, yet also one that you can make incredibly complicated by trying to manufacture exclusively items of legendary quality. Either way, it is a solid addition to Factorio as it allows you to build your bases in a slightly different manner than before. Instead of creating sprawling factories that eventually start to span half of the planet, you can choose to go for a more complicated yet elegant design. Which one is more optimal, you might ask? Well, the answer is I have no idea, but what I do know is that I like having more toys to play around with, and this is exactly that. The next world I visited was Fulgora, which was quite a shock to my system, both literally and figuratively. I say this because Fulgora is a seemingly endless graveyard of some lost civilization that is constantly, and I really do mean constantly, being hit by lightning strikes. You can't even move beyond the safety of your lightning rods without getting a firm reminder that you should probably play it safe while carrying around what might just be an actual ton of metal. As for the other kind of shock, that came when I realized what the gameplay loop was in Fulgora. Rather than fear the lightning, you actually have to harness it and store its power in batteries, as that's what's going to be fueling all of your production. Similarly, if you want any amount of raw resources, you have to first mine the ruins of whatever civilization occupied the planet before you, and then process them in recyclers. Even this isn't particularly straightforward, as the recyclers will spew out all sorts of nonsense at you, both useful and nearly worthless. So if you want to get the cool mech armor or the incredibly useful electromagnetic production plants, you'll need to develop a system to sort and recycle a massive amount of materials. It was a very different challenge than anything I ran into with Factorio thus far, and it was also a very entertaining one to solve, even if it did, ironically enough, make me recycle my builds over and over again in order to make better quality versions. Gleba is the third and final of the starter planets I visited, and it was yet another wacky yet satisfying one. Whereas both Volcanus and Fulgora were generally quite desolate, Gleba was absolutely teeming with both flora and fauna. It was here that I realized that despite being very simple due to its focus on function over form, Space Age's presentation can be downright captivating with plenty of tiny little details, environmental effects, and background audio blending together to create a very unique feel for each world. The music in particular plays an important part here, as it only occasionally shows up to enhance the atmosphere of whatever world you're exploring, but without ever drawing direct attention to itself, so you can still focus on whatever problem has your brain tied up in knots. And let me tell you, there was a lot of knots to be found on Gleba. Instead of following any of the design principles you might be used from vanilla Factorio, Gleba asks of you to create what is essentially a biological factory. What this means is that everything you do and everything you touch has a shelf life. Everything rots. Even the science you can produce here rots. As such, not only do you have to optimize your base so items don't just rot away on belts, but you also have to make 100% sure that you always have a contingency plan if rot does get into the system. If even a little hiccup occurs, it can very quickly lead to your entire factory collapsing. And once that does happen, the only way to restart it is to clean it out by hand and then kickstart the whole process all over again. Doing this completely blind was one heck of a challenge, and I must admit I had to reload my save more times than I could count because I would constantly mess up. Yet despite how much it brutalized me, Gleba ended up being my favorite world. There is just something uniquely satisfying about setting an elaborate and highly interconnected machine and then watching it do its thing, fully knowing that you've painstakingly accounted for every possibility and that this thing, this one in specific, won't break apart at the seams like the dozens upon dozens of its predecessors. So to quote EA, it is the sort of thing that fills you with a sense of pride and accomplishment. Aquilo was the fourth and final planet I visited, and since it is very close to the end, it was unsurprisingly a bit of a nightmare to deal with. The area I started on was a tiny, brutally cold hunk of ice stranded in a vast sea of ammonia. In order to do anything, I needed to construct heating towers and run heating pipes everywhere, as well as pave everything with concrete as the ice proved itself to be a terrible building surface. Combine this with the fact that Aquilo has very few natural resources and thus requires you to ship many goods to it, and you got yourself a proper endgame challenge. This is also where I unfortunately got myself stuck for the time being. Since I was more focused on exploration and experimentation, I didn't cross-pollinate my planets with new technologies or optimize productions. Which then meant that I couldn't simply request everything I need and have it delivered to me automatically. And so, despite being inches away from escaping the solar system and achieving victory, I am probably looking at another 20 to 30 hours of flying around and reworking everything before I can finally rise triumphant. That is by no means a complaint, however. It is my first time playing through Space Age, so I knew from the very start that my lack of knowledge would eventually come to bite me, and that at some point I would need to rework everything from the ground up. After all, that's kind of part of the fun when it comes to Factorio. You build something, you realize it sucks, and then you rebuild it again only to realize you somehow made it even worse. But then, the third time, that's when you strike gold and create something magnificent. And those moments are exactly what makes all the struggle worthwhile. I'm sure this is going to come as a massive surprise to all of you, but Factorio's Space Age is essentially just a more advanced version of Factorio. The complexity level has been gradually raised, there's all sorts of new toys to mess around with that can greatly boost your productivity, and there's a plethora of new and uniquely satisfying challenges to overcome. And yet, despite all of these additions, at its core, Space Age is still good old Factorio and thus more addicting than hard drugs. So if you love the idea of slowly chipping away at a massive problem and watching your Rube Goldberg machine work its magic, then I do believe I can heartily recommend Space Age to you. Just whatever you do, don't expect to get a lot of sleep once it has its hooks in you. As for me, I had an absolute blast playing it over the past weekend, and as soon as I'm done with all of this, I am going right back in, as I still have so much stuff I really want to get to. Thank you guys for watching, and if you enjoyed this, or even if you didn't, please do let me know. If you would like to see more, make sure to subscribe, hit the stupid bell, pet your flying brick, and do whatever other nonsense you gotta do these days. Thank you again for watching, and I do hope to see you soon. Bye bye!